Welcome to Truth and Liberty, where we educate, unify, and mobilize. And now your host, Richard Harris.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Truth and Liberty Show. So glad to have you joining us again on this program. On Truth and Liberty, what we're trying to do here is to equip the church with truth, tools, information, knowledge, resources, organizations that will empower us to stand for truth in the public square. You know, Christ commanded us to make disciples of all nations, teaching them to observe all things whatsoever He has commanded us. And one of the things that is a big issue in today's world is the subject of socialism or versus capitalism, right? In every election, you see the politicians arguing back and forth about whether we should have higher taxes or lower taxes and all of this. And one side of the aisle is accusing the other, the elite, so-called, of not paying their fair share of taxes, and all of these economic arguments, and what's good for the economy, bad for the economy, and so on. And so I want to talk today on today's show about economic issues. Many times we see in our culture, we see the conservative side of things divided into what we call social conservatives or religious or the Christian right, and then fiscal conservatives or economic conservatives. And I want to say today that this is a false division that ought not to exist, because every Bible-believing Christian ought to be a fiscal conservative. Because the real question is should we embrace socialism or free enterprise? America was built on free enterprise, and free enterprise is the biblical model. Free enterprise is God's way. And I'm going to show that to you from Scripture here in just a second. And some of you might be recoiling already from what I'm saying, thinking, how can you do that? That's not right. That has nothing to do with the Bible. But it has everything to do with the Bible. And I want to submit to you today that free enterprise economics is a moral issue. Just as much, and this might not sound right, but it's just as much a moral issue as abortion or this LGBT stuff, because it all relates to God's design for humanity, His order, what He's commanded us to do, and how we're supposed to live our lives. And so, normally when we think of economics, I'll grant it to you, we don't think of it as a moral or biblical issue, but that's simply because that's how we've been conditioned. Our pastors and our churches don't talk about economics very often, and when they do, they may touch on it. They may talk about tithing, or they may talk about, the importance of savings. But we really don't receive teaching inside the church about economic systems, about how the economy relates to the government and vice versa, and these kinds of things. But it's very much a biblical issue. So here, let me just dive in then headlong on this. Karl Marx, the main originator of the concept of communism, although it actually predates him by thousands of years, but in the modern time, he's the one that's credited with it. Karl Marx said communism is, in short, the abolition of private property, the abolition of private property. So basically, it's the word private that we're talking about. In communist systems, the government or the state owns everything, right? We can't have any private property. Marx called it the means of production. We can't have individuals owning the means of production, because then they'll oppress other people. The state has to own it. The problem with this is, there's many problems, but basically if the state owns all the means of production, then the state has all the power, and people have zero freedom. There's other consequences of it too. But the idea that I want to get across to you today is that private property is, meaning individuals can own property and do with it what they want, as long as they're not hurting other people, is a core idea, core biblical idea. We can go all the way back to the very first page of Scripture to find this. In Genesis chapter 1, verses 26 through 28, the Word says, God blessed Adam and Eve, and God said unto them, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth and subdue it, and have dominion. He's speaking to individuals and he's telling them, this created realm that I've put you in now, I want you to take dominion over it. I want you to use it. I want you to replenish it. I want you to make it better, more suitable for you. Be creative. Take dominion. Now, people do this through the concept of ownership. An individual owns property. You don't have to go any farther than Adam and Eve's own sons, Cain and Abel. In Genesis chapter 4, it says in verse 3, in the process of time it came to pass that Cain, Adam's first son, brought of the fruit of the ground an offering to the Lord. So he harvests his crop and he gives an offering of his crop to the Lord. And then it says, and Abel also brought of the firstlings of his flock. Don't forget the pronoun there. His flock. This flock of sheep belonged to Abel, the first son of Adam. You see, the law of ownership, the idea of owning private property, is woven directly into the created realm. We don't need anybody to teach us this. We instinctively know these things, that property that I obtain, I have a right to it, to use it for my own purposes and for my own designs. The seventh commandment says, thou shalt not steal. So obviously, if it's talking about property that belongs to someone else. And then even in the ninth commandment, when it says, thou shalt not covet, what? Thy neighbor's house. Okay, so private property is endorsed throughout the Bible. In the book of Joshua, for example, when the Israelites entered into the promised land, after they conquered the inhabitants of that land, they were, each family was given their own allotment, their own inheritance in the promised land. Property, land that they could control, they could farm, they could mine, if you will, or raise cattle, or build houses, or do whatever they wanted to do with to build their own prosperity and their own lives. You remember the story of Gideon? The enemies of God are the Midianites, and they're in the land, and what are they doing? They're oppressing the people by stealing and destroying their crops and their livestock. Gideon, it says, is in the threshing, he's in the winepress threshing wheat. The idea is that he's trying to hold on to his property. It's implied there. God set up this system of private property. It's not something that we as human beings can pretend like it doesn't exist, set aside as if we have the power to, decide and set up our own system. Even in the New Testament, these days people have become so biblically illiterate that you hear younger people especially claiming things that are so crazy, like that Jesus was a socialist. It's just so wrong because it's factually untrue. Any careful reading of Scripture shows that Jesus was absolutely not a socialist. He endorsed private property in many different parables. I could give you a list here. The parable of the two debtors in Luke chapter 7, right? You have debtors, they owe money. You have the friend who comes to his other friend at midnight asking him for a loaf of bread. That's because he's got his own bread. And the neighbor says, no, go away, right? So this idea of people owning their own property, you've got the parable of the wise and the foolish builders. If the government decides where you can build your house, then what's the whole point of a wise man choosing to build on the rock and a foolish man building on the sand? Even the parable of the prodigal son. One son takes his inheritance and his father doesn't stop him. The government doesn't stop him, and he chooses to go and waste it on prodigal living and on, prostitutes and all these other things. The other son, hardworking, frugal, this kind of stuff, is upset because, he's been so faithful to his father. And the father says to the older son, everything that I have is yours. Private property. Again, we could go into great detail. The pearl of great price. Jesus says that the kingdom of heaven is like a man who discovers a treasure. This is the treasure hidden in the field. I'm sorry. Discovers a treasure hidden in the field. And what does he do? He goes and sells all that he has and buys that field. Free enterprise, private property. So then we have the pearl of great price. They're fishing. They discover a clam with a great pearl in it. They sell everything they have to get that pearl. Again, free enterprise. What about the parable of the talents, the parable of the 10 virgins, the parable of the unjust steward, the wise steward? It's throughout the Bible. In almost every chapter of the Bible, we have either express endorsements of private property and free enterprise or implied endorsements. Even the Apostle Paul in his letters. Take, for example, 2 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 7. He's talking about giving and receiving there. And the Apostle Paul says, "As every man purposeth in his own heart, not grudgingly or of necessity, God loves a cheerful giver." He's saying give willingly of your own property and as you want to give, not as someone compels you to give. The government, through taxation in today's welfare society, this is forced charity is what it is. The government's going to take from the wealthy and give to the poor. We're going to make people be charitable. This is not biblical, folks. It's contrary to all of Scripture. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 28, the Bible says, "Let him that stole steal no more, but rather let him labor, working with his own hands, the thing which is good, that he may have to give to him that needeth." This is voluntary charity. One of the reasons why we want people to work and generate wealth is so they have enough to share with those who are less fortunate. 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 11 says, "Study to be quiet and to do your own business and work with your own hands as we commanded you." Why? Verse 12, "That you may walk honestly toward them that are without, and that you may lack nothing." So Paul is saying you're responsible here to work hard to provide for yourself. And then in 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse 8, Paul says, "If any provide not for his own, and especially those of his own house, he has denied the faith and is worse than an infidel." So again, the Bible is telling us that we should take care of ourselves. We're responsible to earn our own way. For one reason is to take care of ourselves, but another is that we might have to give to other people. We're talking about voluntary charity here. One more Bible verse for you, 2 Thessalonians chapter 3, verses 10 through 12. This says here, "For even when we were with you," Paul is talking again to the Thessalonians, "this we commanded you, that if any would not work, neither should he eat." Socialism, welfare system, it's all predicated on the idea of we're going to take wealth and give it to others. And as our guest today is going to explain, and we're going to talk about this, socialism destroys the incentive that exists in nature for people to take care of themselves, work hard on their own behalf to improve their own lives and their own condition, and to meet the needs of others. And if the government is going to take care of me, if my income is going to be the same regardless of how much I work or how hard I work or what quality I do my job with, if that's not going to change the amount that I make, then guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to do the very least that it takes to get by. This is human nature. This is what happens every single time socialism is tried. This is why socialism and communism fail. As our guest today is going to share with us, it's contrary to human nature. Human nature is unalterable. We can't do anything about it. It's part of the natural world. And you see, God's design, though, is that people be free to make their own choices and do with their own property what they desire, as long as they're not violating the royal law of love, as long as they're not infringing on other people's rights or hurting other people. I can take my money and invest it, or I can spend it. I can give it, or I can use it in some other way. It's not the government's job to come in and tell me what I can do with my own things. You see, if we'll let the laws of nature take their course, and we have a free enterprise system under the rule of law, with laws that are designed to create circumstances for prosperity, like the rule of contracts, a system which recognizes intellectual property rights and things of that nature, then we're going to see prosperity. This reason, because America was built on the Bible and the Bible endorses free enterprise, and we follow these precepts of natural law, is the reason why America has become the most prosperous nation in the history of the world, generating over $27 trillion every year now. 1/4 of the world's wealth is generated by this nation, even though we're only 4% of the world's population. So here with me today, I have a very special guest, Scott Shepard. He's the General Counsel counsel of the National Center for Public Policy Research. He's a former law professor and has written extensively on the subject of free enterprise. We're going to talk more today about what is free enterprise, what is socialism, why is free enterprise a preferable system, and I think you're going to really enjoy this conversation. So don't go away. We'll be right back in just a minute as I sit down with my new friend, Scott Shepard of the National Center for Public Policy Research. Are you passionate about standing for truth in the culture, but don't know how to get started? Well, Truth and Liberty, our mission is to educate, unify, and mobilize the body of Christ to stand for truth in the public square. And as part of our mission, we provide you with an amazing array of resources on our website. And our website has just been revamped, remodeled, and retooled to be user-friendly. And I'm so excited about it because I believe that there's nothing like it out there anywhere. I want to encourage you today to go to truthandliberty.net and check out the Resources Center and the Get Equipped Center. On our Resources Center, you will find hundreds of links, hundreds of videos, articles, blogs, even America's original founding documents can be found on Truth and Liberty's Resources Center. It's searchable by topic, preset topic, or you can put in a custom search to find exactly what you need and what you're interested in. In the Get Equipped section, we link you to tools created by our strategic partners, including Pray, Vote, and Engage tools. We culture impact teams, civic action teams, biblical citizenship in modern America, biblical worldview training, and more. So go today to truthandliberty.net and find what you need to get equipped to stand for truth in the public square. Okay, well, we're back now here on Truth and Liberty. Thank you to all of you for joining us today and sticking with us. We're talking about free enterprise today, a subject that, as I said in my opening, I believe is really of critical importance, and that it's really a biblical issue, guys. This is not just an economic issue. We get divided on the conservative movement between social conservatives and economic conservatives, but from a biblical standpoint, economics is a biblical issue, and the Bible talks about it a great deal. So I'm really excited today to have on the show a special guest, Scott Shepard, who's the General Counsel for the National Center for Public Policy Research. And he's as I said to him before the show, he's a recovering law professor. So he's an attorney educated at Wake Forest School of Law. Sorry, I almost insulted you. North Carolina and Willamette University College of Law in Oregon. He taught there. A real scholar. Saw him speak at the recent Pray, Vote, Stand Summit in Washington, D.C., and just knew I had to have him on the program. So, Scott, thank you so much for coming on Truth and Liberty today.
It's delightful to be with you this afternoon. Thank you so much.
Well, so you've heard what I said, about the idea that economics or free enterprise really is a biblical issue. When I read the Bible from one end to the other, I see it supporting, endorsing, or assuming free enterprise systems, private property ownership. I don't ever see a single instance of forced collective ownership of property. And I don't know if you're comfortable commenting on that, but is this really a moral issue?
Well, I think it's a moral issue on a series of grounds, including the fact that in the modern world, but I would think also in the ancient world, unless you have all of the power such that you set up a theocracy, if there is to be freedom of worship, if there's to be freedom of expression, if there's to be freedom of thought that's requisite in a modern setting in order to express and hold one's beliefs, then you have to have a free society and you have to have free markets. Every time a country moves toward socialism and certainly communism, what you see is the reduction of the sphere for any sort of free thought, and certainly for any sorts of belief. I mean, the communists were not exactly shy about their disdain for religious belief. And look at Britain now. I mean, arguably the progenitor of free speech and free expression. But now, especially with the Labor government in place, if you don't toe their line, even on Twitter, then there are criminal consequences.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one of the things I think we as Americans need to remind ourselves, we need to go back to our roots on this subject of property, the founders in the Declaration said that we have an unalienable right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, but that articulation by Jefferson was normally articulated as life, liberty, and property. Am I right?
Well, that's right. And Mr. Jefferson didn't. I went to UVA for law school. I have to call him Mr. Jefferson, but Mr. Jefferson didn't substitute pursuit of happiness because he didn't believe in the right to property. He understood a fuller right to property. Not only did you get to keep the stuff that's yours, but you got to enjoy it. You got to apply your mind and your talents and your endeavor to make the world better for yourself, so you could be a happier person. And that's really the heart of the American dream, because we've all come here and raised up to be motivated to make the best for ourselves, and not to believe that we were born to a station or a class, but to shoot for the moon. And Mr. Jefferson understood that.
So, you may know former Congressman Bob McEwen. He's got a teaching that he does called Politics Easy as Pie, P-I-E. And it's one of the best summaries of free enterprise that personally I've ever seen. But he talks in this teaching about how the greater the taxation, the less freedom, because wealth gives you choices, right?
Yeah.
And now money doesn't buy happiness, this we know. But it does give you choices, and choices equal freedom, and the less money you have, the less freedom you have. And so is it possible, Scott, let me rephrase it and put it this way. Is it fair to say that the less control someone has over property, the less autonomy they have?
Oh, absolutely. I've never understood, when I was young, there were still some redeeming factors to the left. Right, that they hadn't become full authoritarians. They still defended free speech and those sorts of things, but they didn't care. They were happy to be leftists and socialists on economic issues. And my point, even then, was, now look, if you can't control your wallet, you can't control any of the rest of it. If you have to stand in a dole line to get cash, then what you do with that cash is totally up to the people who give you the money. So what you do, on at Speaker's Corner, what you do as your career, what you do behind closed doors, all of that is controlled by the people who control your cash. And so you better be in favor of these property rights if you want any of the rest of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so Scott, let's just pause for just a second, and let me ask you now, you are the General Counsel for National Center for Public Policy Research. Can you share with us what that organization is and what do you guys do?
Sure. It's not a very eye-catching name. Sadly, we used every generic word possible when we were established in, I think, 1982. But despite that, we've got two large branches. One is a home for Black conservatives and libertarians and Black citizens of the right, a massively increasing group these days. And our other primary group is the one that I have directed and that Stefan Padfield now directs. And I've kept a significant hand in. That's the Free Enterprise Project. And what we do, in just a couple of words, is fight the woke takeover of corporations. And we do that in defense of free enterprise, in defense of real capitalism, in defense of American liberty, because I don't know if the phrase is all that common. I tend to be a little bit of a nerd about these things, but Mao made a long march through the institutions, destroying institution after institution of China to totally remake it in the communist image. Well, the leftist academics in the West got a hold of that phrase, and they thought it was an absolutely charming idea, right? And so they've done the same long march, and they've taken the news industry, they've taken Hollywood, they've taken higher education, they've taken primary education. The only things that really were left were corporations and the military. And what you see now is the full gung-ho effort to take those last two bastions. And so the Free Enterprise Project at the National Center, we were some of the first to get on the watchtower. And my predecessor, Justin Danhoff in particular, were the first to get up on that watchtower and say, hold on, corporations are not the friends of liberty anymore. They're not the friends of free markets. And every time somebody like Larry Fink, who we'll get to, the CEO of BlackRock, says capitalism, he's telling a lie.
Mm.
That's the one of our efforts that I know most about, and I suspect we'll spend most of the day talking about.
Well, so let's go there. I want to talk about BlackRock and woke capitalism, so to speak, the invasion of progressives into America's boardrooms and what's happening, what that's all about. But let's try to lay a little bit more foundation here because we hear the word capitalism. You know what I've been doing, Scott, in the last year or two when I teach in our government school and other things is I refuse to call our system capitalism because that's a term from Karl Marx. Instead, I want to use the word that you guys use in your program. It's free enterprise.
Yeah.
I think it's more descriptive and certainly doesn't, that way we're not playing on their turf in terms of words. But what is free enterprise? What do you guys mean by it? What is that concept?
Yep, free enterprise is just this: your stuff is yours and mine is mine, and we can exchange it if we'd like, or we can not exchange with one another, and that's where it stops. That it's the of non-introduction of force, non-intervention of regulation, except the absolutely necessary stuff, right? Because most regulation ends up helping out the big companies in derogation of the small, and that it pretends to be in support of the poor and disenfranchised and all of that. It ends up hurting the poor the most and taking away their ladder to climb. And so
Mm.
free enterprise is just it's really the instantiation in the economic sphere of the golden rule, right? I'll do unto you what I'd like you to do unto me, and you do the same. And so either we'll agree or we'll part ways, and that'll be the end of it. No force, no jackboot in the face.
Hmm. And so the ability of people to do with their own property what they would like, as long as they're not hurting someone else in the process. Is that
Exactly.
pretty fair? Pretty libertarian articulation there. But so this free enterprise system that we've had in the United States up until you might say the modern era after LBJ, or you could maybe get in a line drawing contest there. But basically, free enterprise in America has produced the largest economy in the world at $27 trillion in gross domestic product. 1/4 of the world's wealth is generated right here in the United States, even though we only have 4% of the world's population. So that to me is mind blowing. I mean, America is known as the land of opportunity for a reason. How did we earn or get that moniker? How is America so prosperous?
Well, I mean, we had a good head start, right? Because before we got to free markets and free minds and American liberty, we eventually threw them away. I was just listening to a book before we started about 1773 and four, right? The build up to the revolution. We got a good head start because the British had gotten quite a distance toward free markets before us, not the whole way, and they fought their class problems, but between the British and us, we exported this wonderful system of just letting people alone and being in free engagement with one another throughout the world. And it has been the single greatest driver of the defeat of poverty, of starvation, of famines, of disease, of hopelessness, anything that's ever happened outside of the spiritual sphere. And it is the single finest technology or development of man's creation in all of history. It is the best thing that's ever happened, and uh, the only justification for opposing it, well, the only honest one, is that as an addendum to the idea, which I think is not complete, that the love of money is the root of all evil.
Mm.
If I may, the love of power over other adults is the root of all evil, right? And so when you see derogations from free markets and free society, where you can agree or not agree and head out the other way, is people who want to control your life for their personal aggrandizement.
Well, you mentioned love of money is the root of all evil, and certainly I'm not advocating for the love of money, but the left or progressives, they claim that capitalism oppresses people because the rich oppress the poor and so on. But another way of looking at free enterprise is that really what free enterprise does, and I want your take on this. This isn't original with me. I'm pinching again from my friend Bob McEwen, but is that free enterprise is a system that rewards people for solving the needs of others, and the better and more efficiently you solve those needs or wants or desires, the bigger your reward is. So like, take for example Amazon, right? Yeah. They thought of a better way to deliver packages or the online shopping experience, and it's just become this massive industry. Or Bill Gates, he's the one that came up with Microsoft operating system, which was better than anything else, and look what happened. So what do you think about that? It's actually a system that rewards people, creates incentives, which benefits everyone.
Yeah, that's exactly the two. There may be more, but the two geniuses of free markets that spring to my mind are, first of all, that they harness the immutable facts of human nature. Right, the communists are always making the new Soviet man or the new woke man or nonsense, or not even man anymore, but sure, right? But they have to remake human beings in order to make their ridiculous system work. Well, free markets harness the innate facts of human nature, and so you create vast opportunities and wealth for others by pursuing your own fully legitimate interests. I'd like a bigger house. I'd like to send my kids to college. And as a byproduct of that, you make things better, faster, cheaper. You invent new things that massively benefit other people's lives who have done nothing except to buy the thing that you created. And then the other fact of it is that all totalitarianisms, always, or authoritarianisms even, all controlled markets fail because nobody can know enough to control a market. As soon as control exists, then you're relying on the understandings and insights of a couple of people instead of all people. This is generally goes by the name of the invisible hand, right? But if you just let people be free, all the information necessary for vast explosions of productivity and need satisfaction are accomplished without anybody controlling it, because as soon as you control it, sort of Schrodinger's cat, right? As soon as you start to control the process, you destroy it, and you destroy the wealth creation and the happiness creation.
Yeah, and there's something that I think is really essential to really effective free enterprise, and one of the secret sauces, if you will, of America's great success, and that is a concept which, as an attorney, you're going to be really familiar with, but it's the rule of law. And in nations that don't have the rule of law deeply rooted in their culture and government, free enterprise falters and doesn't achieve the results that we've seen in this country. Can you comment on that?
Well, yeah, I'm probably somewhat more libertarian than you on whatever the spectrum is, and so I would cut an awful lot of government. But one thing that has to remain is there's only one kind of equality that can be achieved here on Earth, which is equality before the law, which means that everybody has to attend to the same set of rules. The government sanctioned deciders, the judges, will decide in the exact same way, without regard to fear or favor, without regard to heritage or lineage or political attachment or whatever they are. Everybody gets the same shake, and that's the only equality that's achievable. And when anything else is tried, then you necessarily move away from the rule of law because, oh, well, we like this group, and so we're going to allow them, to take your stuff because they're our favorite group, or whatever the metric is. But as soon as you move away from objective law, everything becomes shaky. Nobody trusts anyone anymore. Information isn't exchanged. Boom, it all falls down.
Yeah, and that's why, the Lady Justice, right? We've all seen the statue of the woman with the scales. She's wearing a blindfold for a reason, right?
Yeah.
Because justice is blind, or it should be. And not to get too political, but one of the most concerning things that's happened, in my judgment, in the last 4 or 5 years has been the politicization of our law enforcement. Can you comment on that? And if we continue going down that road, what's going to happen to this nation?
Well, we're a little bit out of an election, and I work for a 501c3, so I have to be careful about this. And I won't speak about parties or anything, but as movements go, defund the police and the politicization of police organizations is just about one of the most noxious and ugly that have come down the pike, because those movements were claimed to be in support of and for the benefit of inner city minority groups in particular. Well, how does yanking police and protection and the rule of law out of inner city communities help those communities? How does unleashing gang violence on children and old women and everybody else in that community, particularly the vulnerable, how does that help them? And the answer is that when you've talked to the people in those communities, what are you talking about, right? There are legitimate concerns about the way some police forces, some police behave, and I have a real problem with the way that a previous administration or two took spare munitions from, I think, the Iraq War, and just handed them over to police. So we have these ridiculous SWAT teams that look like they could go into battle, and then knock on the wrong door, and yeah. It's horrible. So there are things that could be fixed about American policing, but stripping the most vulnerable of the most basic of protections against lawlessness is criminally insane, and proof that the people who supported it don't have no concern whatever for the people they claim to be helping.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so let's contrast then. Now, wait, before we go there, there was one other question I wanted to ask you about. And the idea of free enterprise necessarily means that people are responsible for their own decisions, right? Yeah. So another thing, there's the rule of law, but there's also contract. Freedom of contract is a critical part of it, where people ought to be and have to be free to enter into their own transactions. And so I'm responsible to make the best decision I can on the use of my money, and I don't need the government coming in and undoing that, or limiting my choices, or telling me what I can or cannot do in the free market. Otherwise, it's no longer free. Am I understanding that correctly?
Well, that's absolutely right. I forget who I'm quoting, and I'm going to misquote them, but the government that's big enough to hand you a check is big enough to take away everything you have, right? When you grant the authority of government to give you a little, that means they can take everything, right? And the notion, part of being free means that you get the benefits of your success, and hopefully you'll be a good person, a kind-hearted person. You'll engage in charity. You'll share with the deserving, however you define deserving, because it's your stuff. You get to decide, right? But it also means that you take the knocks on your chin when you make a gamble that fails, or you don't bother to get out of bed, right? And yeah. One of the vast things that we've lost, and we're paying such a price for it, especially our young people, is that my father and I had a conversation about this sometime in the 90s, and I wish we'd taped ourselves, because we called it, between the helicopter parenting and the trophies for everybody, we've destroyed. Well, we've kneecapped significant portions of the generations that came up after the middle 90s, right? You've got to know, and you've got to know early, that when you fail, you failed, right? So that you can learn from it and be wiser in the future. And the same is true of freedom, right? If somebody's able to give you a do-over, to hand you a check, right, despite the fact that you didn't get out of bed and you lost your job, well, then they can come when you're successful and take everything you got. And the effect of that is to destroy incentive and the returns to incentive, and then everybody's lying in bed and coming up with strategies to get the other guy's stuff instead of building the pie, which might go back to an earlier reference, which is the way that humans thrive.
Well, so if you look at, say, lottery winners, for example, the typical lottery winner, say the lottery cashes in and they win $10, $20 million or something like that. the entirety of that fortune in the typical lottery winner situation is gone in maybe 2 to 3 years, and the person is back to where they started. Have you ever seen those statistics, those numbers before?
Yeah, that's it's pretty standard, not surprising, and driven. I'm not a gambler. I don't know that I've ever bought a lottery ticket, but that comes from I ill-gotten stuff you haven't worked for is likely to go through that process regardless, because you don't have the background to have earned it.
Yeah.
Whether you get it, by inheritance or whatever, unless you've earned it, you probably haven't built up the skill set to take advantage of what's fallen on you. And so that's why we don't have, you and I both did trust law in our past, why we don't give a pile of money to an 8-year-old or to an 18-year-old. We wait until they have a little experience and hopefully a little wisdom. And it's the same thing with unearned. I don't mean ill-gotten, but unearned wealth. It won't last long unless the background of wisdom is there.
Well, and doesn't that whole thing kind of speak to the idea that wealth creation or improving our situation in life is primarily a result of our own choices, what we do with what we have. And that it's not a lack of money per se is not the problem. You see, the left seems like they want to throw money at everything. Oh, our schools are failing, give them more money. Oh, our infrastructure is crumbling, well, hire this or whatever. Instead of allowing the free market to do what God designed it to do and allow human beings to be responsible for their own destiny, they're constantly taxing and redistributing wealth. But this really doesn't solve anything, does it? Because it's the choices that we make as individuals that matter most.
It makes absolutely everything worse, absolutely all of the time, because of the dynamics we've been talking about. But it's also a useful metric, because take public education as an example. Everybody honest knows at this point that public union-driven education is an absolute catastrophic failure. And the more vulnerable the children and the more needy, the more they need a good step up, the worse the schools are, and the more they're handicapped than if they'd had, in some cases, no education whatever, if they'd just gone out and sold newspapers from the age of 6. But the people who pretend to be for the children do not care, right? Mm-hmm. Because what they want is to have the money go through their system. And I taught in Chicago for 5 or 6 years. In Chicago, any system that money goes through, everybody gets their bequet. I think that's the phrase that's used or was used in Chicago. There's opportunities for grift if people are being taxed so that public entities can spend money, and the fact that they don't actually care about the kids is perfectly clear in the outcomes in Chicago's schools, mm-hmm. And it's true up and down the line. I can't think of an instance in which free enterprise doesn't beat state organization, whatever we want to call that. And yet the people who claim the loudest to be setting things up for the benefit of the children or the vulnerable or the oppressed never turn out to care about the people that they're using as their human shields for their power grabs.
So one of the things that's critical to the left's narrative is that America is, oppressive, that's racist, and all these other, they're constantly dividing people into classes. And it's not just race, it's now we have sexual orientation and everything else. But if America were, and at one time, it's fair to say America was systemically racist. But you look today at great Black and Hispanic men and women all across America who have reached even the ultimate in terms of success, both political, financial, cultural, whatever. Clarence Thomas on the United States Supreme Court, Barack Obama, President of the United States, even though he's a, by no means conservative. Condoleezza Rice and Herman Cain and many of these other Black Americans. It brings me back to, I'm sure every one of them encountered racism in their life. Of course, me as a white male, it's easy for me to say these things, but but they overcame, and how did they overcome? And doesn't that show that the most important thing are the choices that you made? Because Clarence Thomas came from absolutely abject poverty, dirt floor hut in the South, sharecropping family or whatever. So what are your thoughts on that? Just as far as, is America really truly the land of opportunity?
It isn't the land of opportunity. It's not the land of oppression. It's had its problems. Every country has its problems. It works. Here's the difference. It works every minute of every day to fix the problems. And this recent eruption of anti-racism, which is it's just pure racism with the sexism, orientation discrimination, with the vectors pointed in the other direction. The reason that arose is because we were this close. We were this close as a republic to having racism entirely behind us in any not some hillbilly up in, I live in West Virginia, in the hills behind me or something like that. But the real racism was gone entirely. And so the response of anti-racism was to revive racist tension so that these race hustlers, the shtick wouldn't go away, and income and wouldn't go away. And because if we really were past all of that, as we were so close to being, what you'd see is more and more successful people of all colors and creeds and orientations, and a real achievement of the melting pot, and seeing people according to the content of their character. But then, if you don't have any ructions in society, if you don't have any fights,
Conflict, yeah.
then free markets work very, very well, and human liberty works very, very well. And then what does the left do? And so I think this was a panicked response to the fact that the thing they claimed to want was this far away, but they never actually wanted it. What they wanted was the power derived from having the tensions.
So, Scott, I saw a study probably a year ago now or whatever. It was a poll results that a majority of millennials in America, and I think it's probably true for the next generation as well, believe that socialism is a better system than, now they said capitalism, I think that's a dirty word, but anyway, socialism is better than free enterprise. What is socialism exactly?
Well, while we're on the topic, I understand the critique of the word capitalism, but my gosh, what is capital except the stuff you get in reward for working hard, right? Mm-hmm. And you'll notice that all the people, and this will get to the socialism point, all the people who are yapping about socialism and the evils of earning a buck, of earning a profit, they sure like their paychecks. And they sure don't work for nothing. Ibram Kendi, one of the expositors of this totally racist anti-racism, is charging $20,000, $40,000 for a speech. Now, gosh golly, that doesn't seem consonant with the left's notion of socialism and of course communism. What socialism is in theory, socialism and communism. It's a society where everybody has equality of outcome. Whether you work hard, whether you don't get out of bed, whether you've got insights, whether you've got obstructions of the mind, your outcome is the same. And we've already noted that one of the responses to that is everybody stays in bed because there's no incentive to get up. And the Soviets, the communists tried to make a new Soviet man. That failed. You can't change human nature. You got to work with it. And yet they constantly try this. And the claim is that under socialism, everybody's equal and then everybody's free, but not. That's what we were talking about. The only possible equality on earth with humans is the equality under law, before the law, because think about it. If equality of outcome happens, it's still not equality, because you've had to take quite a lot of assets from the people who really could have succeeded quite well and stolen that away to give it to people who could have achieved nothing and haven't applied themselves and all of those other things. So you don't have equality of outcome, because one of the outcomes is how much money is stolen from you, or how much money did you get stolen that was stolen from somebody else. And you go down the line. So there is no such thing as equality of outcome. But trying to get there does two things. First, it kills the all of the impetuses that make free enterprise the road to human happiness and the end of misery. And second, it's an awful good system, like we were talking about Chicago earlier. It's a terrific system for people who want to pretend that outcomes are equal to get their, well, in the Soviet case, dachas. In the Obama's case, people
Yeah.
with five houses of the size of mansions really shouldn't talk about equality of outcome, should they?
Yeah, yeah. They're now careful though. They're very oppressed, so we need to be sensitive to
Yes,
that.
yes. I
So,
know. It's weird. As I say, West Virginia, it's weird that all this white privilege I'm surrounded by hasn't resulted in bigger houses for these folks.
well, one of the things like in America, I saw a statistic that in 50 of the 58 categories, top categories of technology, America has the most patents, and in the eight remaining category, America is second place.
Yeah.
So this is all kinds of technological inventions and things that have improved human condition. Everything from the light bulb to MRIs to the global positioning system that we all use in our phones, the personal computer, the microchip, and on we could go. Chemotherapy for cancer and many, many, many other things. So does socialism take away the incentive for these kinds of things that benefit humanity? The Amazon companies of the world, the Microsofts. What happens to human incentive in a socialist system?
Well, you've said it exactly already. It destroys the incentive to do anything, and it also builds the opportunity for these tribal fights that we've been
Hmm.
talking about as well. You look at that list of patent holders in the United States of America. It's not white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. We got Catholics and Jews and Indians and the melting pot of American success of people who came here legally, uh, intended to work hard, took advantage of the opportunities, the incentives, the possibilities of the American market because they wanted to reach for the moon too. They didn't want to, stagnate in whatever place they'd come from that hadn't adopted free and efficient markets. And they came here and they were free, and nobody objected. Well, I mean, stupid people did, right? But the broad run of American capitalists, right, didn't object because of their skin color or their background or how many consonants were in their names, and they just got on with it. And that's so you want to achieve all the things that the left pretends to want to achieve. You
I
do it with
think
free
we,
enterprise
I
and
think
free
it's
people.
it's it seems like we have sort of this perception of, oh well, there's socialist countries in Western Europe that are doing really well. Why can't we just be like them? That maybe there's some sort of in between place of communism light where we can go and everybody be happy and content and stuff like that. Can you comment on why that is a make believe?
Mm. Well, it's just, that started within minutes of Marx writing Das Kapital and the other ones. Almost instantly, his buddies said, "Yeah, this is never going to work. But if we can get closer, right, the Fabian socialists and all of this nonsense." And so, since it started, everybody on the left has been looking for this third way, right? This third uh, uh, outlet that you can get all the benefits of free enterprise, but you get to control stuff, right? And it doesn't exist for exactly that reason. You're either free or you're not, right? And the house can't be divided half free and half controlled. It's one or the other. And you look at these ridiculous claims made by the leftists, right? Bernie Sanders saying, "Oh, the socialist Danish economy," and the prime minister of Denmark said, "What are you talking about?" Right? There was a time up until I think the early '90s when there was more socialism in Scandinavia until it ran out for them too, right? And then they moved economically very much to the right. The clearest example is, of course, and the one clearest to us as Americans is Great Britain. Now, if Mr. Churchill had been allowed to stay, in 45 and 46 and 47, instead of the keys being turned over to real socialists, then I suspect that Britain would have come out of that war with not being instantly sclerotic. But by the time Mrs. Thatcher came in '79, socialism had driven Britain into the drink, right? Into the channel. 30% inflation and strikes constant, and British workmanship being some of the worst in Europe and some of the worst in the world. You go down the list, socialism destroys everything it touches, and communism is a fairy tale for stupid children.
Yeah. I've heard it said, we've only got 3 minutes left. I've heard it said that communism is where the government owns everything. Socialism is where the government lets you own it, but then they control it. So it's the same net effect. When Donald Trump was president in 2016 to 2020, he cut federal regulations in a major way. I'm not sure the total number, but he had a rule that for every new reg we had to lose 2. And then he also cut taxes, and we saw the economy of the United States take off on rocket fuel. Since that time, we've reverted back to high taxes, high regulation, the Green New Deal. Kamala Harris wants to basically eliminate inheritance in America with a massive inheritance tax and corporate gains, even unrealized gains. What's going to happen to the American economy if Kamala Harris is elected president and, say, for example, the Democrats who agree with her take over the Congress? And I know you're a 501c3, so I'm not asking you, this is not an endorsement, it's just an analysis.
Well, let me, if you don't mind, let me dial back to my childhood, to 1979 and 1980, when Britain was on its knees, but we were sucking wind as well. We weren't in great shape because of years of real Democrats and fake Republicans. Dick Nixon, a lot of people don't like Dick Nixon. I don't like him because he governed entirely as a left-winger, right? Mm-hmm. And so we had year after year after year of ratcheting up regulation, of destroying the economic incentive. Nixon came out and said, we're all Keynesians now, which is essentially socialism through the money interests. And sure enough, by the end of the 70s, not only was everything falling apart, but a hero of mine, perhaps my age partly explains that, but the man out of the West came out on his horse and said, look, the way we fix this is by shrinking government.
Yes.
The 11 scariest words in the English language, right? We're with the government, we're here to help, all the way down the line. And everybody thought that he was a dullard, that he was a buffoon. Anthony Lewis and all the people who knew better than us, he was a New York Times columnist, said, well, this isn't going to work. We're going to be bankrupt in minutes. And instead, glory.
Yeah, it took off. Well, Scott, I just want to tell you thank you so much for coming on the show. It looks like we're out of time. We've got about 30 seconds left. What's your website, sir, so people can go and check out all the great articles that you have there?
We're at freeenterpriseproject.org. And if you want to see more broadly, it's nationalcenter.org. You can check out Project 21 there as well.
All right. Thank you so much again for coming on the show. We're going to have you back so we can continue this discussion. I want to thank all of our viewers today, and hopefully you'll join us again next time here on Truth and Liberty.